Ambassador Sarah stood before the great chamber of the Galactic Council. The massive room could hold 10,000 beings. From across the stars, today it held fewer than 300. The rest were dead or running or hiding in the darkness. Between worlds, her voice echoed through the empty seats as she began to speak. This message is for the record, for history, for whatever comes after us. 52 years ago, humanity came to this chamber. With a warning, you laughed at us, you dismissed us, you called us children. Seeing monsters in the dark, she paused and looked at the scattered survivors who remained. We were right, and now it is too late. The story of humanity's warning began half a century earlier, when Earth was still new to the galactic stage. Humans had discovered faster than light travel only 20 years before their first contact with the Council. Snorts. They were primitive by galactic standards. Their ships were slow, their weapons were crude, and there were tragically short. The average human lived barely a century, while some Council species measured their lives in thousands of years. Though an ancient race of crystalline beings had found humanity first, they watched the small pink creatures crawling out of their single planet and saw nothing remarkable. Humans were simply another young species taking their first steps into a vast and indifferent universe. Earth was granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council. This meant they could trade with other species and travel through shared space lanes. It also meant they had one vote among 212 member civilizations. Their voice meant nothing. Their opinions were tolerated, but never taken seriously. For the first decade, humanity played the role expected of them. They traded. They learned. They grew human. Scientists studied alien technology with desperate hunger. Human merchants established trade routes. Human diplomats smiled and nodded and accepted their place at the bottom of the galactic order. Then Dr. James changed everything. Was an astrophysicist working at a small human research station near the edge of explored space. He was studying the cosmic background radiation when he noticed something strange. There were gaps in the data, dark spots where stars should have been. At first he thought his equipment was faulty. He checked and rechecked. The gaps remained. He pointed his instruments toward the galactic rim and watched for 6 months. What he saw made him sick with fear. The gaps were growing. Something was moving through the darkness at the edge of the galaxy. Something vast and hungry. It moved slowly, perhaps only a few light years per century, but it moved with terrible purpose. Behind it there was nothing. No stars, no planets, no energy signatures at all. Just empty void where life had once existed. Sent his findings to Earth. Earth sent them to the Galactic Council. The response was immediate and crushing. The humans are mistaken, declared the representative. Our surveys show no anomalies in that region. Perhaps their instruments are faulty, suggested the species of gas giant dwellers who consider themselves experts in cosmic phenomena. Young species often misread the data, or perhaps they are simply afraid, said High Counselor Vex of the oldest and most powerful species in the Council. His 4 eyes regarded the human delegation with something between pity and contempt. Humans live such brief lives, it is natural for them to see threats everywhere. When you only have 100 years, every shadow looks like death. The chamber filled with the alien equivalent of laughter. Earth's ambassador at the time was a man named David, he stood before the mockery with his jaw tight and his hands clenched at his sides. We are not mistaken, he said. Something is coming. Something that eats stars and worlds and leaves nothing behind. If you will not look, then you are choosing blindness. We have looked, Vex replied. For millions of years we have watched the cosmos. There is nothing at the edge of the galaxy except empty space and dying stars. Go home, little humans. Learn more before you try to teach your elders. Return to Earth with the council's dismissal ringing in his ears. That night he met with the leaders of Earth's unified government. They sat in a small room far beneath the surface of the planet, in a bunker built during the old wars before humanity learned to stop fighting itself. They won't listen, said. They think we're children crying about nightmares. General Commander of Earth's Defense Forces studied the data, had gathered. The images showed the slow consumption of distant star systems. The numbers showed the rate of advance. Her face was stone as she calculated. 200 years, she said, maybe less. That's how long before it reaches inhabited space. 200 years is nothing to them, said President Michael Tours. The live for 10,000 years. To them this is a distant problem, something for there to worry about. Then we prepare alone, said we. Have 2 centuries, that's 8 generations of humans, 8 generations. To build, to research, to get ready for what's coming. The council will notice if we militarize, warned Earth's intelligence director. They'll ask questions. They might try to stop us. Tours was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke the words that would shape human destiny. Then we do it quietly. We smile at the council. We trade with them. We pretend to be the harmless young species they think we are. And underneath we prepare. We build ships. We develop weapons. We create bunkers deep in dead worlds where no one will look. We store seeds and genetic samples and everything we need to rebuild. And when the threat arrives, asked when it arrives, we'll be ready. And if the council still won't listen, then at least humanity will survive. The room fell silent. They all understood what was being proposed. Earth would become 2 things at once. On the surface, a minor member of galactic civilization. Below, a species preparing for war against something that devoured worlds. There's another possibility, said quietly. If we're right and the threat is real, the council will eventually see it too. Maybe not in 10 years or 50. But eventually they'll come to us for help. And when they do, Tours asked. Smile was cold. When they do, we'll be the only ones who can save them, and they will never dismiss humanity again. The meeting ended with a simple decision. Earth would issue one more warning to the council, a formal document that would be entered into the permanent record, and then humanity would begin the long work of preparation. 3 months later, Ambassador stood before the council chamber one final time. He read the warning into the record. He presented the evidence. He begged them to investigate, to prepare, to do anything except ignore the coming darkness. They refused, gathered his documents, and walked out of the chamber. As he left, High Counselor Vex called after him, "Do not trouble us with these fantasies again. Ambassador, the galaxy has been safe for millions of years. It will remain safe long after your species has evolved into something worth listening to." Did not respond. He simply kept walking on. Earth, the first construction crews were already breaking ground on project. Lighthouse, a network of hidden shipyards that would eventually produce the largest fleet in galactic history. The warning had been given, the record was clear, now humanity would prepare. Alone, the decades passed like water through open fingers. Every 10 years, Earth sent a new delegation to the Galactic Council. Every 10 years, they presented updated data showing the threat growing closer. Every 10 years, they were dismissed. The pattern became almost ritualistic, human. Scientists would gather their evidence. Human diplomats would request time. Before the council, the ancient species would listen with expressions of patient boredom, and then they would explain again why humanity was wrong. Your instruments are too primitive to measure what you claim to measure, they said during the second warning. Your mathematical models contain fundamental errors, they insisted during the third. You are a species defined by fear, High Counselor Vex declared during the fourth. This obsession with destruction says more about humans than it does about the galaxy. Ambassador after ambassador returned to Earth with the same message. The council would not listen, the council would not prepare. The council considered humanity a minor annoyance, a persistent child tugging at the robes of its elders, but humanity was not idle during these years of dismissal. Deep beneath Earth's surface, factories hummed day and night. They produced components that were shipped to hidden facilities throughout human space, on barren moons and lifeless asteroids. Teams of engineers assembled ships. Secret, the vessels were not elegant. Like council designs, they were brutal and efficient, built for one purpose only: war. General had died 30 years after the first warning, but her plans lived on. Each generation of military leaders inherited the same mission: build, prepare, wait. The research divisions made breakthroughs that they never shared with the council. Human scientists studied the limited data they had about the threat and developed theories. The entity at the galaxy's edge was not a single being, but a swarm, countless trillions of microscopic machines that worked together with a single purpose. They consumed matter and energy to create more of themselves. They had been doing this for longer than any civilization had existed. Understanding the enemy allowed humanity to design weapons against it, but there were complications. 60 years after the first warning, the council began to notice changes in human behavior. Earth was trading less. Human colonies were becoming self-sufficient. Human ships were traveling in patterns that made no sense for commerce or exploration. The humans are hiding something, reported an intelligence officer to High Counselor Vex's successor. Their energy consumption has increased dramatically, but their visible production has not changed. The excess power is going somewhere. The new High Counselor, unnamed, considered this information. He was younger than Vex had been, more curious and slightly less certain of his species supremacy. Perhaps we should investigate, he said. The council voted. The motion failed by a narrow margin. The older species saw no reason to waste resources monitoring a primitive race like humanity. If the humans wanted to waste their short lives building secret projects, that was their concern. Still, the suspicion remained. Humanity responded by becoming even more careful. They established trade relationships with 3 younger species who shared their concerns. They were aquatic beings from a water world on the Galactic rim, they had seen the dark. Gaps in the stars themselves and believed human warnings, the null were energy beings who existed partially in subspace. They could sense things other species could not, and what they sensed terrified them. The broken chain were former slaves who had won their freedom. Only 2 centuries ago, they trusted no one except those who had also been dismissed by the powerful. These 4 species formed a quiet alliance. They shared information and resources. They coordinated their preparations, and they waited for the day when the threat would become impossible to ignore. That day came 73 years after humanity's first warning. A colony on the galactic rim went silent. They sent a ship to investigate. The ship found nothing. The colony was gone, not destroyed, not damaged, simply absent where 12 million had lived. There was only bare rock and empty space. Even the atmosphere had been stripped away. The council called an emergency session. This is unprecedented, the representative said. Her crystalline body flickered with distress colors. We have no explanation for what occurred. We have an explanation, said Earth's ambassador, a woman named Doctor. She had been waiting for this moment her entire career. We have been giving you the explanation for 7 decades. She activated a display showing the trajectory of the consuming darkness. Red line moved from the galaxy's edge, growing closer with each passing year. The line passed directly through the location of the lost colony. The swarm has reached inhabited space, said colony was the first. It will not be the last. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species who had ignored humanity for generations suddenly demanded answers. How fast was it moving? How could it be stopped? What did humanity know? Answered every question with the same response. We told you, we warned you, we begged you to prepare. You chose to mock us. Instead, High Counselor called for order. When the chamber finally quieted, he addressed the human ambassador directly. What do you suggest we do? We suggest you start building weapons and evacuation ships. We suggest you coordinate your defenses. We suggest you do in the next decade what we have been doing for the past 70 years, and will humanity share what it has built. Was silent for a long moment. Back on Earth, she knew the debate was raging. Some wanted to help the council immediately. Others wanted to let them suffer for their arrogance. The decision had not yet been made. We will consider it, she said finally, but first you must acknowledge that you were wrong. You must admit that humanity saw this threat coming while you were blind, and you must agree to restructure the council so that no species warning is ever dismissed again. The chamber exploded with outrage. The ancient species, proud beyond measure, could not accept such terms. Humanity was demanding power in exchange for survival. It was blackmail. It was extortion. Did not flinch. We are not demanding power. We are demanding that you learn from your mistake. If you will not learn, then we cannot trust you to use our weapons wisely, and we certainly cannot trust you to stand beside us when the real fighting begins. The vote was called by a margin of 3. The council rejected humanity's terms, gathered her documents, and prepared to leave. Wait called. What will humanity do now? Looked back at the chamber full of ancient beings who had just signed their own death warrants. We will close our borders. We will protect our people and our allies. And when you finally understand what you are Facing, you can come to us and ask. Again, she walked out of the chamber. Within a month, human space was sealed. Trade stopped, communication ceased. The borders were guarded by ships that no one had known existed, carrying weapons that no one had imagined. The Council sent delegations to negotiate. They were turned away. They sent threats. The threats were ignored. They sent spies. The spies disappeared. Humanity had become a fortress, and the galaxy was about to burn. In the darkness at the edge of everything, the swarm continued its slow advance. It did not notice the small creatures arguing among themselves. It simply consumed as it had always consumed, as it would always consume until there was nothing left to eat. 2 more colonies fell in the following year, then 5, then 12. The dying had begun. The refugee ships began arriving at human borders 5 years after the Council rejected Earth's terms. They came in vessels of every design, crystal ships carrying the last survivors of a dozen worlds, gaspods, fleeing their ancient home systems, even vessels proud and golden now with damage and desperate for shelter. Admiral James I stood on the bridge of the human Dreadnought lighthouse and watched them come. He was the grandson of the scientist who had first seen the threat. His entire life had been shaped by his grandfather's discovery. How many? Today, he asked his second in command. 47,000, sir. Mostly their fell. Yesterday, James closed his eyes that had existed for billions of years. It had been the center of one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. Now it was nothing but stripped rock and silence. Let them through the outer perimeter. Process them at Station 7, and then, sir, and then they follow the rules like everyone else. Weapons surrendered. Authority accepted. Integration into human protected space. The rules were harsh but necessary. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment. They had built fortress worlds and evacuation corridors. They had stockpiled food and medicine and genetic samples from every species they could reach. They had created a system that could absorb billions of refugees and keep them alive, but the system only worked if everyone followed the rules. Some refugees accepted the terms gratefully. They had seen what the swarm did to planets. They understood that survival required sacrifice. They surrendered their weapons, accepted human authority, and settled into new lives on human protected worlds. Others refused. Fleet arrived at the border 3 months after the first refugees. 12 warships, still armed, still proud, demanding entry as equals rather than supplicants. Admiral met with their commander via communication screen. Fleet master was ancient even by standards. His golden scales were faded with age, and his 4 eyes burned with wounded pride. We will not disarm, declared. They have never surrendered their weapons to another species. We will not begin now. Then you cannot enter, replied. You would turn away those seeking shelter. That is barbarism. It is survival. Your weapons would disrupt our defensive coordination. Your refusal to accept authority would undermine our chain of command. We have spent 80 years building a system that can defeat the swarm. We will not let your pride destroy it. Eyes narrowed. We ruled this galaxy while your ancestors were learning to use fire. You cannot give us orders. I can and I am. Surrender your weapons and accept integration or return to Council space and take your chances with the swarm. The communication ended for 3 days, the fleet hovered at the border. Ships surrounded them, weapons ready but not aimed. It was a test of will. On the 4th day surrendered, his fleet disarmed, his people entered human space as refugees rather than conquerors. The proud who had dismissed humanity for nearly a century now lived by human rules. Word of surrender spread through the galaxy. More refugees came. The flood became a tide back on Earth. The government debated what to do with their new power. We could help them retake their territory, argued Fleet Admiral, daughter of Ambassador Sarah. We have the weapons, we have the ships, we could push the swarm back. At what cost? Asked President Moore's great-granddaughter of the president who had first ordered preparations. Our weapons work, but they are not infinite. Every missile we fire is one we cannot replace. If we spend our arsenal saving Council space, we may not have enough left to protect our own. Then what do you suggest? We establish a defensive line, we protect what we can hold, and we let everything beyond that line fall. The room fell silent. They all understood what she was proposing. Billions of beings would die because humanity could not save them. Entire civilizations would end because the resources to save them did not exist. There is another option, said General David II, grandson of the ambassador who had delivered humanity's first warning. We could give our weapons to the Council, teach them how to build more. Let them fight their own war. They had 80 years to build weapons, replied coldly. They chose not to. Now they want us to save them from their own arrogance. They were wrong. That does not mean they deserve extinction. The debate continued for weeks. Outside the council chambers, the swarm continued its advance. Worlds fell. Species died. The countdown to total annihilation continued with mechanical precision. Finally, humanity made its decision. Earth would offer help one more time, but the terms would be absolute. The Council would dissolve. A new governing body would form with humanity at its head. Every species would contribute to the war effort according to their abilities, and when the war ended, the new order would remain. Ambassador Sarah delivered the offer to what remained of the Galactic Council, the ancient chamber that had once held 10,000 representatives, now held fewer than 500. The rest were dead or missing. High Counselor listened to the terms with a face like carved stone. You are asking us to surrender our independence. I am asking you to survive, replied. You can keep your pride and die, or you can accept our leadership and live. Choice is simple, simple for you. Perhaps your species has nothing to lose. We have everything to lose. We have spent 80 years preparing for this moment, 80 years of sacrifice, 80 years of being mocked and dismissed and sanctioned for telling the truth, and now you want us to spend our children's lives saving civilizations that called us children. Her voice had risen without her meaning it too. She forced herself to calm down. We will help you, but we will not die for your pride. Accept the terms or face the swarm alone. Called for a vote. The chamber divided. The younger species and those closest to the swarm voted yes. The older species, those who still remembered their power and glory, voted no. The motion failed. By 23 votes, felt something die inside her. She had known this was possible. She had prepared for it, but part of her had hoped that extinction would teach the ancient species humility. Then we Have nothing more to discuss, she said. The borders will remain open for refugees who accept our terms. For those who do not, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to, as she left the chamber, called after her. Ambassador, will you at least tell us how to fight them? Will you share your research, your weapons designs, anything that might help us survive? Paused at the door, she thought of her grandmother, who had delivered the final message that would soon be broadcast across the galaxy. She thought of all the humans who had died building the fleet that now protected them. She thought of the centuries of preparation that the council had wasted. You had 80 years to prepare, she said quietly. You chose to mock us instead. We warned you, counselor, again and again. We warned you, and now it is too late. She walked out of the chamber for the last time. Behind her, the council began to collapse into recrimination and despair. Species blamed each other for the failed vote. Old alliances shattered. Ancient friendships ended in bitter accusations. The swarm did not care about their politics. It simply continued to advance, consuming everything in its path. The final act was about to begin. The fall came faster than anyone expected. Within 2 years of the council's final rejection, the swarm had consumed 40% of inhabited space. The great civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years crumbled like ancient paper. Their fleets designed for ceremony and peacekeeping were useless against an enemy that did not negotiate and could not be intimidated. They were the first major species to fall completely. Their crystalline bodies were rich in elements that the swarm needed. Entire generations were harvested in days. The species that had first discovered humanity, that had looked down on the small pink creatures with such contempt, ceased to exist in the span of a single month. The followed. Their gas giant homes were emptied of everything that could be processed. The great floating cities that had drifted through alien skis for centuries were torn apart molecule by molecule. They fought the hardest. Their pride would not let them flee. Fleet after fleet engaged the swarm, their golden ships, firing weapons that had not been updated in generations. The swarm absorbed every attack and continued forward. For every unit that destroyed, 1,000 more emerged from the void. High Counselor watched his civilization die from the bridge of his flagship. He had evacuated to space when the swarm reached the now. He drifted at the edge of human territory, watching his species' final hours on distant sensors. How many made it out? He asked his aide. Perhaps 2 million, Counselor, out of 8 billion. 2 million. They had ruled the galaxy for longer than most species had existed. Now they were reduced to a handful of refugees begging for shelter at the borders of a species they had once mocked. Ordered his ship to approach the human defensive line. Admiral James met him in person this time. The human commander was younger than had expected, though age meant little when comparing species with such different. What struck was the weariness in the man's eyes. This was not someone who enjoyed watching civilizations fall. I am prepared to accept your terms, said they. Words tasted like poison, but he forced them out, all of them without condition. Nodded slowly. I know what this costs. You, Counselor, I take no pleasure in your surrender. Then why demand it? Because we cannot fight this war with allies who do not trust our judgment. Because your species spent 80 years ignoring our warnings, and we need to Know that will never happen again, and because if we are going to save what remains of your people, we need total coordination, not negotiations, not debates. Orders followed without question. Closed his 4 eyes. When he opened them, something had changed in his expression. The pride was still there, but it was buried now, locked away behind the necessities of survival. I understand. What do you need from us? Your people have skills we lack. Your scientists understand alien biology better than ours do. Your engineers can work with materials we have never seen. Integrate into our system. Contribute what you can and help us build a wall that the swarm cannot cross. Integration began immediately. Across human space, refugees from a 100 species joined the war effort. Engineers worked alongside human technicians. Scientists collaborated with what remained of the broken chain. Survivors of ancient slavery taught others how to endure unimaginable hardship. The defensive line took shape. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment. They had mapped the natural barriers in space, the places where stellar gravity and radiation created that the swarm could not easily cross. They had built fortress stations at these points, armed with weapons designed specifically to destroy the microscopic machines. The weapons worked. Human missiles carried payloads that disrupted the swarm's communication network. Without the ability to coordinate, the individual machines became mindless and slow. Human energy weapons generated frequencies that destabilized the swarm's molecular structure. Entire waves of attackers dissolved into harmless dust, but the swarm was vast beyond imagining. For every wave destroyed, another followed. Machines did not feel fear or pain or discouragement. They simply continued forward, probing for weaknesses, adapting to human tactics, seeking any gap in the defensive line. The battle for survival became a war of attrition. Human ships patrolled the borders day and night. Crews worked in shifts, living on their vessels for months at a time. The stress was enormous. Some broke under the pressure, others simply kept fighting because there was no alternative. Admiral spent his days coordinating the defense and his nights reading reports of worlds that had fallen beyond the line. He had made a choice to protect what he could hold rather than risk everything trying to save more. That choice haunted him every time he saw the casualty figures. We could have helped them, he said to his aide one night after a particularly brutal engagement. If the council had listened, if they had prepared, we could have saved billions. They did not listen, sir. That was their choice, their choice. Their fault. Stared out at the stars. And yet the dead are just as dead. Regardless of who is to blame, the war continued. Months became years. The defensive line held but barely. Human production facilities worked at maximum capacity, replacing the weapons and ships lost in each engagement. The refugee populations contributed where they could, but the burden fell primarily on humanity. Earth became the capital of a new galactic order, not through conquest, but through survival. Species that had once ruled the stars now looked to humans for leadership. They followed human orders, lived under human protection, and slowly began to adopt human ways of thinking. The transformation was not always peaceful. Some refugees resented their dependence. Others clung to old prejudices, unable to accept that the species they had Dismissed was now their only hope. Conflicts erupted in refugee camps and integration centers. Human security forces struggled to maintain order, but through it all the defensive line held. The swarm reached the border of human space and stopped, not because it had given up, but because it could not advance. Every attack was repelled. Every probe was detected and destroyed. The machines had finally encountered an enemy that was prepared. 3 years after the line was established, the swarm began to concentrate its forces. Sensors showed massive gatherings of machines at several points along the border. Something was coming, something big. Admiral called a council of war. Representatives from every surviving species attended. They gathered in a chamber that had once held only humans, now filled with beings of every shape and form. They are preparing a major assault, reported multiple coordinated attacks across the entire defensive line. Our simulations suggest they will breach at least 3 points. The room erupted in fear. If the line broke, everything would be lost. What can we do? Asked the survivor, her crystalline body flickering with distress colors. Looked at the gathered representatives. These were the survivors, the ones who had accepted humanity's terms, the ones who had chosen to live. We fight, he said simply. We hold the line or we die trying. There is no third option. Council voted unanimously to stand and fight. For the first time in galactic history, every surviving species was united under a single command structure, fighting for a single goal. The swarm's assault came 3 weeks later, and humanity's final message was about to be delivered. Ambassador Sarah stood before the great chamber and spoke the final words of humanity's message. This transmission began 4 hours ago. You have heard our history. You have heard how we warned you, how you dismissed us, how we prepared while you slept. Now I will tell you how the story ended. The chamber was silent. The scattered survivors who remained listened with expressions of grief and guilt and desperate hope. 3 weeks ago, the swarm launched its greatest assault. They attacked at 7 points along our defensive line. At 4 of those points, they broke through, paused, letting the words sink in. Billions of machines poured through the gaps. They moved toward our fortress worlds, toward the refugee populations, toward Earth itself. For 6 hours it seemed certain that we would fall. She touched a control and the chamber's display showed the battle. Stars flickered and died. Ships exploded in silent fire. The scale of destruction was beyond comprehension. Then Admiral James gave an order that changed everything. The display showed a fleet of human ships, battered and outnumbered, moving toward the largest breach in the defensive line. At their head was the dreadnought lighthouse, the flagship of humanity's navy. Admiral ordered his fleet to ram the swarm. Survivors in the chamber gasped. Ramming was suicide. Every species knew this. Our weapons were running low. Our shields were failing. The swarm was adapting to our tactics faster than we could change them, so made a different choice. The display showed the lighthouse accelerating toward the densest concentration of swarm machines. Its weapons fired continuously, clearing a path through the endless mass of enemies. Human ships are not elegant, continued. They are not beautiful or efficient. They are built the way humans build everything, heavy, solid, designed to take damage and keep fighting. Lighthouse struck the center of the Swarm formation. The impact was visible. From light years away, a flower of fire bloomed in the darkness, and when it faded, a gap had appeared in the enemy fleet. Ship destroyed 47 million swarm units in that single impact. The explosion disrupted their communication network across the entire sector. For 3 critical minutes the machines could not coordinate. Other human ships followed the lighthouse. One by one they drove into the swarm, sacrificing themselves to create gaps in the enemy formation. Each impact bought time for the defensive line to reorganize. 217 human ships rammed the swarm that day. Over 8,000 human crew members died. But the line held. Lowered her head for a moment. When she raised it again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I tell you this not to make you grateful, not to make you feel guilty. I tell you this so that you understand what humanity is, what we have always been. She stepped away from the podium and walked among the survivors. Her footsteps echoed in the half-empty chamber. We are a young species. Our lives are short, our history is brief, but we have one quality that the ancient races never understood. She stopped before a group of refugees. Their golden scales were dull with grief, but they met her eyes. We prepare for disaster. We expect the worst. We build walls and weapons and bunkers because we know in our bones that something is always coming. You called this paranoia. You called it the fear of a short-lived species. She shook her head. It is not paranoia. It is wisdom. The universe is vast and cold and full of things that want to kill us. The only way to survive is to prepare. She returned to the podium. The swarm is not defeated. Our assault broke their advance, but they are still out there. They will adapt. They will return. And when they do, we will be waiting. The display changed, showing a map of the galaxy. Human-controlled space was marked in blue. It was small compared to what had existed before, but it was defended. It was organized. It was alive. This is what remains. 42 billion beings from over 100 species living under human protection. We have established new colonies on fortress worlds. We have begun rebuilding industries. We have started training the next generation of soldiers. His voice softened. Many of you lost everything, your homes, your families, your entire civilizations. I cannot give those back. No one can, but I can tell you what comes next. She pointed to a section of the map beyond the defensive line. It was marked in red: swarm territory. One day we will take it back. Not today. Not tomorrow, but eventually. We will develop new weapons. We will grow stronger, and we will push the swarm back to the edge of the galaxy where it came from. She looked at the survivors, species by species, meeting as many eyes as she could. This will take generations. Many of you will not live to see it completed. Your children may not live to see it, but their children will, and they will know that their ancestors stood together against the darkness and refused to die. The display faded, stood alone before the assembly. This message will be broadcast across all frequencies. Every ship, every colony, every refugee camp will hear it. And they will know that humanity's warning was real, that the Council's dismissal was a mistake, and that the price of that mistake will be paid for centuries to come. She took a deep breath. We warned you. You did not listen. Now it is too late to undo what has been done, but it is not too late to Build something new, something better. Civilization that prepares for threats, rather than ignoring them. A galaxy that listens when someone cries, warning. Her voice hardened. We will not forget what happened. We will not let you forget. Every child in human space will learn this history. They will know that arrogance nearly destroyed us all, and they will know that humanity, the species you dismissed, was the one that saved what could be saved. She stepped back from the podium. This is Earth's final message to the Galactic Council. The council that existed for millions of years, the council that ignored our warnings, the council that is now dissolved forever. The display activated. One final time, it showed Earth blue and green and beautiful, orbited by defense platforms and patrolled by warships. Welcome to the human protectorate. Welcome to what comes next. Walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the survivors sat in silence, processing what they had heard. Somewhere beyond the defensive line, the swarm continued its patient waiting. It had consumed half the galaxy. It had all the time in the universe, but so did humanity. On a refugee world at the edge of protected space, a teacher stood before a class of children from 12 different species. They were learning human history, human languages, human survival strategies. The universe is dangerous, the teacher said, reciting the first lesson. The only way to survive is to prepare. The children repeated the words. They would grow up in a galaxy shaped by human determination. They would learn to build walls and weapons. They would learn to see threats before they arrived, and one day when they were ready, they would take back what the swarm had stolen. The final message had been delivered. The warning was now part of history, and humanity, the species that had been mocked for seeing monsters in the dark, had become the light that held the darkness back. Outside the chamber windows, the stars shone cold and distant. Many of them were dead now, consumed by an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. But the light from Earth still burned, and it would not go out.